A quiet morning changed everything. Not because the house looked different, not because the coffee tasted better, not because anyone was there to celebrate. The brokerage statement sat beside your favorite mug, folded in half like every other month. Outside, the same old sedan rested in the driveway. The neighbors hurried to work, unaware that inside this modest home, a family story had just taken a turn no one had imagined decades earlier. The number on the screen had finally crossed a line most people spend their lives chasing. $1 million. And strangely, nothing happened. No fireworks. No sudden feeling of success. No magical transformation. Just silence. The kind of silence that arrives when a woman realizes she has spent years preparing for a moment that was never really about money. Because the first woman in a family to quietly become a millionaire doesn't inherit certainty. She inherits doubt. Someone once worried about paying the electric bill. Someone postponed doctor's appointments. Someone believed investing was only for people born into wealth. Those fears don't disappear simply because a portfolio grows. Behavioral economists call it loss aversion. Our minds often fear losing what we've built more intensely than we appreciate gaining it. That instinct helped earlier generations survive uncertainty, but it can also whisper that security is always one mistake away. She learned to hear that voice without obeying it. Years earlier, her mornings looked almost identical. Coffee steaming beside a notebook filled with tiny handwritten numbers. A paycheck divided before it was ever spent. A modest transfer into index funds. A few dividend payments that seemed too small to matter. It felt almost disappointing. Until one ordinary afternoon, she realized something extraordinary. The dividends had quietly become large enough to pay for groceries. Not because she worked harder, because ownership had been working while she was living her life. She closed the notebook that day with a smile no one else would have understood. And yet, another question remained. If wealth could grow this quietly, why had no one in her family ever believed it was possible? She thought back to childhood dinners where every conversation circled the same question. Can we afford it? Money was never a tool. It was weather. Something that happened to the family, never something they could influence. Years later, she drove that same dependable old car through a quiet neighborhood. The dashboard was worn, but her investment journal rested neatly in the passenger seat. She could have upgraded long ago. Instead, every payment she never made had quietly bought another piece of businesses she'd never visit but would always own. Psychologists call it delayed gratification. The reward isn't found in saying no once. It's found in saying yes to a future that slowly becomes undeniable. That evening, another dividend notification appeared while dinner simmered on the stove. She smiled, then set the phone face down. The moment wasn't exciting anymore. And that was the real surprise. Wealth had become less about accumulation and more about calm. For the first time, she understood that financial freedom doesn't announce itself. It settles into ordinary days until peace feels more valuable than prestige. Still, one question lingered as she looked at an old family photograph on the shelf. Would the next generation inherit her money or her mindset? She noticed something subtle before anyone else did. Family conversations hadn't changed, but her reactions had. When someone arrived with a flashy new SUV financed over 7 years, she simply asked how their children were doing. When coworkers compared bonuses, she quietly updated her annual returns that weekend, then closed the laptop and went for a walk. Behavioral scientists describe social comparison as one of the strongest forces shaping financial decisions. It's remarkably easy to spend money trying to keep pace with people whose goals were never yours. She had stopped running that race. On Saturday mornings, sunlight spilled across the kitchen table as she reviewed a single page: dividend deposits, investment contributions, and one handwritten sentence at the bottom. Own more, Need less. It wasn't a slogan. It was a reminder that every share represented a tiny claim on thousands of people solving problems around the world while she lived an ordinary life. She realized the portfolio hadn't only compounded her wealth, it had compounded her patience. The woman who once checked market headlines every hour now barely glanced at them. A temporary decline no longer felt like failure. It felt like the same businesses she trusted had simply become available at a lower price. History had taught her that markets fluctuate, but disciplined long-term ownership has repeatedly rewarded patience more often than panic. Then one Sunday afternoon, while organizing old family papers, she found a faded envelope containing her grandmother's final savings. The amount was small. The sacrifice behind it was immeasurable. And suddenly, becoming a millionaire no longer felt like reaching the finish line. It felt like accepting a responsibility that money alone could never fulfill. She placed the envelope back in the drawer with the same care her grandmother must have used years before. The bills themselves held little financial power now. The habit they represented was priceless. That Monday morning looked like every other. Coffee. A glance at the brokerage account. A walk through the quiet neighborhood before work. Nothing about her routine suggested she had crossed into the top tier of household wealth. She preferred it that way. Economists often describe hedonic adaptation, our tendency to quickly grow accustomed to bigger purchases until they no longer bring lasting satisfaction. She had seen it happen around her. New kitchens became ordinary. Luxury cars became expected. Bigger houses created bigger obligations. She chose a different form of abundance. Instead of expanding her lifestyle, she expanded her margin. More time, more choices, more freedom to help without needing recognition. She could take a parent to a medical appointment without worrying about missing a paycheck. She could support a niece's education quietly, never mentioning where the money came from. Wealth was becoming invisible, but its impact wasn't. One rainy evening, she sat by the window reviewing her investment journal. The pages weren't filled with dramatic victories. They held decades of ordinary decisions repeated with uncommon consistency. She smiled at a sentence she'd written years earlier. The goal isn't to look wealthy. It's to wake up unafraid. For the first time, she understood what that younger version of herself had been trying to say. The $1 million had never been the destination. It was the evidence that thousands of quiet choices had rewritten her family's future. But one final realization was still waiting for her, and it would change the meaning of wealth forever. The next morning, she left the house before sunrise with the same worn notebook tucked beneath her arm. She sat on a familiar park bench, coffee warming her hands, watching the neighborhood wake up. Dog walkers exchanged quiet greetings. Lights flickered on in modest homes. Children waited for school buses, unaware that the futures they imagined would be shaped by habits they had not yet learned. She opened the notebook to its final page, not to calculate returns, to write one sentence. May the women after me inherit confidence before they inherit money. That was the real milestone. Research on intergenerational wealth has shown that fortunes rarely survive on assets alone. Families that preserve prosperity tend to pass down behaviors, values, and decision-making patterns just as carefully as financial resources. The portfolio mattered, but the mindset behind it mattered more. She realized her greatest investment had never been a stock, an index fund, or a dividend-paying company. It had been the quiet decision, made over and over again, to value tomorrow a little more than today, to ignore comparisons, to welcome patience, to let compounding do what urgency never could. As the sun climbed higher, she closed the notebook and smiled. Nothing about her life looked extraordinary to the people passing by. The house was still simple. The car was still old. The coffee was still homemade. But beneath that ordinary life rested something no one could see. Freedom. Not the loud kind that demands attention, the quiet kind that lets a woman choose how to spend her mornings, protect the people she loves, and sleep without fear of every unexpected bill. Years from now, her family might not remember the exact day she became a millionaire. They would remember something far more important. She was the woman who changed what everyone believed was possible. And perhaps that's what wealth has always been. Not the number you reach, but the fear you no longer carry. If this story felt familiar, even in small ways, I hope you'll stay for the next one. These stories are for women who believe financial independence is built in quiet moments, patient choices, and the courage to think differently from the crowd. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What financial habit do you hope becomes part of your family's legacy? If these reflections resonate with you, consider subscribing and joining this growing community. There are many more stories waiting to be told, and perhaps one of them will feel like your own. The quietest victories are often the ones that echo for generations.